Good morning, sir. Good morning, classmates. My topic today is about utilitarianism, and it comes from the book Ethics Discovering Right and Wrong by Louis Pullman and James Fisher, 7th edition. So, what is utilitarianism? According to our reference from the textbook that was given in our canvas, utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism, meaning I'd focus to the result of what the people doing, or if it is good or wrong. And then utilitarian ethical theory is the ethical action that maximizes the welfare of the maximum number of people. Example, can be applied to individual actions. Should I cheat on my business law exam tomorrow night? Or can be applied to a general rule. Should John Ray prohibit cheating? Or to an ethical principle, is cheating unethical? Okay, so you can answer that in your own mind if cheating is unethical or ethical. Sure, it is unethical. The focus is on the overall consequences for the total group of people. The person wanting to take the action does not count more than anyone else. Okay, so let me share you a story. It is about two men that was stranded in the island. And let us imagine that you are one of these men. Suppose you are on the island with a dying millionaire. Okay, so with his final words, he begs you for one final favor before he died. I've dedicated my whole life, says the millionaire, to baseball, and for 50 years have gotten endless pleasure rooting for the New York Yankees. New York Yankees is a baseball team in New York. Now that I am dying, I want to give all my assets, $2 million, to the Yankees. And then pointing to a box containing the money. And in large bells, he continues, okay, would you take this money back to New York and give it to the Yankees? Owner, so that he can buy better players. And then you agree. You promise him to take his money and give this to the owner of the Yankees baseball team. You agree to carry out his wish, and which point a huge smile of relief and gratitude breaks out on his face as he expires in your arms. So before he died, you see his smile. He's happy for granting his wish. And then after traveling to New York, you see a newspaper advertisement placed by your favorite charity. Then you saw a advertisement newspaper, and what written on that newspaper is World Hunger Relief Organization, whose integrity you do not doubt, pleading for $2 million to be used to save 100 people dying of starvation in Africa. Not only will the $2 million save their lives, but it will also purchase equipment and the kinds of fertilizers necessary to build a sustainable economy. You decide to reconsider your promise to dying Yankee fan in light of this advertisement. So, what will you do? You're going to keep your promise from the fan of the Yankee, the millionaire, or you're going to change your mind to, instead of giving it to the owner of the Yankee team, then you will give the money to the hungry people in Africa. What is the right thing to do in this case for you? Consider some traditional moral principles. Let us use the conscience, the love, and the golden rule. First is the conscience. One principle often given to guide action is let your conscience be your guide. And I recall this principle with fondness, for it was the one my father taught. It was said by one of the author of this book, and an early age, and it still echoes in my mind. But does it help here? Is your conscience can help this kind of situation? No, since conscience is primarily a function of unbringing people's conscience speak to them in different ways according to how they were brought up. Depending on upbringing, some people feel no qualms about committing violent conscience overstepping on us. Suppose your conscience tells you to give the money to the Yankees, and My conscience tells me to give the money to the World Hunger Relief Organization. How can we even discuss the matter? If conscience is the end of it, we're left mute. Okay, so for you, what will you do? Will you follow your conscience, or will you follow your principle of keeping the promises to the Yankee Fund? Second is, another principle urges us is do whatever is most loving. As we can see and we can read in the Bible, Jesus in the particular set forth the principle, as he says, love your neighbors as yourself. So what emphasize this message is you have to do what is right, and you have to do what is Jesus teach us. And the last principle is the golden rule: do to others as you'd have them do to you. So if other people do good to you, right things to you, so you must do the same thing to your neighbor or to the others. Conscience, love, and the golden rule are all worthy rules of thumb to help us through life. Yes, this is our daily guide, our conscience, love, and the golden rule. But they work for most of us, most of the time, in ordinary moral situations, but in more complicated cases, especially when there are legitimate conflicts of interest, they are limited. So according to our text box, the conscience, loves, and the golden rules has a limit in terms of legitimate conflicts. So I think you also experience that kind of situation, that if you are in a legitimate conflicts, big trials in your life, maybe our conscience, love, and golden rule has a limit. A more promising strategy for solving dilemmas is that of following definite moral rules. Suppose you decide to give the millionaires money to the Yankees to keep your promise, or because to do otherwise would be stealing. The principle you followed would be always keep your promise. So as we can see these pictures, the left side is the team on the story, the New York Yankees, and the right side is the a baby from the Africa, a very skinny, or what we call from this, underweight baby, no? Okay, so types of moral theory. The left side is the deontology ethics. It is the act of the principle of keeping promises. So if you're going to choose to keep your promise from the Yankee Fund, from the millionaire, you're going to give the money to the young owner of the Yankee team instead of giving to the needy people. So you are belong of the deontology ethics. But if you are going to change your mind, instead of giving the money to the owner of the Yankee team and then give it to the needy people from the Africa, then your ethics is teleological, okay, not keeping the promise for the sake of others. It is also a good one. And also the classic utilitarianism. In our moral lives, we use utilitarian reasoning all the time. I might give money to charity when seeing that it would do better for needy people than it would for me. That kind of principle is a classic utilitarian. Instead of saving your money for your own self, you give this to the beggars or to the people who need more money. And then another one is in a time of war, I might joining the military and risk dying because I see that society's needs at the time are greater than my own. So you're going to sacrifice yourself, become a soldier of your country so that you can help in your society. And one of the earliest examples of utilitarian reasoning is found in Sophocles' Antigone in 440 before Common Era, in which we find King Creon faced with the tragic task of sacrificing his beloved niece, Antigone. Why? Who has violated the law by performing funeral rites of her brother Polynices. Creon judges that it is necessary to sacrifice one person rather than expose his society to the dangers of rebelliousness, regardless of that person's innocence or social standing. So what King Creon did this time is that to sacrifice his niece, despite of it is one of his family member, but he has no choice but to follow what is the role of their kingdom than to become rebellious in his own kingdom. So he chose to sacrifice using the utilitarian reasoning. As a formal ethical theory, the seeds of utilitarianism were sown by the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus in 342 to 170 before Common Era, who stated that pleasure is the goal that nature has ordained for us. It is also the standard by which we judge everything good. According to this view, rightness and wrongness are determined by pleasure or pain that something produces. So if the things gives you pleasure, that meaning according to Epicurus, this is good, this is right thing. But if something can make you pain, or someone makes you pain or makes you hurt, so it's not good, or it is wrong, it is not favor to his principle or theory. Epicurus' theory focused largely on the individual's personal experience of pleasure and ethical egoism. Nevertheless, Epicurus inspired a series of 18th century philosophers who emphasized the notion of general happiness, that is, the pleasing consequences of action that impact others and not just individual. Francis Hutchinson stated that the action is best which procures the greatest happiness for the greatest numbers. And in David Hume, 1711 to 1776, introduced the term utility to describe the pleasing consequences of actions as they impact people. The classical expressions of utilitarianism, though, appear in the writings of two English philosophers and social informers, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. They were the non-religious. Okay, so remember, these two English philosophers are non-religious ancestors of the 20th century secular humanist, optimistic about human nature and our ability to solve our problems without resource to God. Okay, so let us remember these two philosophers. They did not ask or seek principles from God. They have their own principle about how to solve the kind of problem. Engaged in a struggle for legal as well as moral reform. They were impatient with the rule-bound character of law and morality in the 18th and 19th century in Great Britain, and tried to make the law serve human needs and interests. Okay, so let us study these two English philosophers. There are two main features of utilitarianism, both of which Bentham articulated: the consequentialism principle and the utility principle. The consequentialism principle states that the rightness or wrongness of an act is determined by the goodness or badness of the results that flows from it. It is the end, not the means. So, as we have said a while ago, it is the result, or it is, if it is either good or bad, and then the counts, the end justifies the means. The utility or hedonist principle states that the only thing that is good in itself is some specific type of state. For example, pleasures, happiness, welfare. Hedonistic utilitarianism views pleasure as the sole good and pain as the only evil. Okay, so if it is gives you pleasure, then it is good. If it is give you pain, then it is also evil. To quote Bentham, nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. So in our world, there are two standard of our principle of utilitarianism. It is the only good and evil. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do as well as what we shall do. An act is right if it either brings about more pleasure than pain or prevents pain, and act is wrong if either brings about more pain than pleasure or prevents pleasure from occurring. Okay, so Bentham invented a scheme for measuring pleasures and pain that he called the hedonic calculus. The quantitative score for any pleasure or pain experience is obtained by summing the 7 aspects of pleasurable or painful experience: its intensity, duration, certainty, nearness, fruitfulness, purity, and extent. adding up the amounts of pleasure and pain for each possible act, and then comparing the scores would enable us to decide which act to perform. With regard to our example of deciding between giving the dying man's money to the Yankees or the African famine victims, we would add up the likely pleasures to all involved for all 7 qualities. If we found that giving the money to the famine victims would cost at least 3 million hedons, but that giving the money to the Yankees would cost less than 1,000 hedons, we would have an obligation to give the money to the famine victims. Okay, so Vintam invented that kind of measuring pleasure using the 7 principles. However, Vintam's philosophy may be too simplistic in one way and too complicated in another. It may be too simplistic in that there are values other than pleasure, and it seems too complicated in its artificial hedonic calculus. The calculus is encumbered with too many variables and has problems assigning scores to the variables. For instance, what score do we give a cold drink on a hot day or a warm shower on a cold day? However, do we compare a 5-year-old's delight over a new toy with a 30-year-old delight with a new lover? Can we take your second car from your from you and give it to the bigger? Okay, so that is example questions. Also, in the situation of John Stuart Mill is it was to meet this sort of objections and save utilitarianism from the charge of being a pig philosophy that Bintham's successor. Okay, so John Stuart Mill is successor of Bintam. John Stuart Mill sought to distinguish happiness from mere sensual pleasure. Okay, he's trying to distinguish, he's trying to separate the happiness from the pleasure. His version of the theory is often called eudaimonistic utilitarianism, from the Greek eudaimonia, meaning happiness. He defines happiness in terms of certain types of higher order pleasures or satisfactions, such as intellectual, aesthetic, and social enjoyments, as well as in terms of minimal suffering. That is, there are 2 types of pleasures. The lower or the elementary include eating, drinking, sexuality, resting, and sensuous titillation. Mill argued that the higher or more refined pleasure are superior to the lower ones. A being of higher faculties requires more to make him happy, is capable probably of more acute suffering, and certainly accessible to it at more points than one of an inferior type. But one may object, how do we know that it really is better to have these higher pleasures? Here, Mill imagines a panel of experts and says that of those who have had a wide experience of pleasures of both kinds, almost all give a decided preference to the higher type, because Mill was an empiricist, one who believed that all knowledge and justified belief was based in the experience. So that is the principle of Mill, that knowledge of justified belief was based in experience. Okay, so by this view, people who experience both rock music and classical music will, if they appreciate both Paper, Bach, and Beethoven to the Rolling Stones or the Dancing Demons, that is generally move up from appreciating simple things. For example, nursery rhymes to more complex and intricate things. Mill has been criticized for not giving a better reply, for being an elitist, and for unduly favoring the intellectual over the sensual. But he has a point. Don't we generally agree, if we have experienced both the lower and the higher types of pleasure, that even though a full life would include both, a life with only the former is inadequate for human beings? Isn't it better to be Socrates dissatisfied than the pig satisfied, and better still to be Socrates satisfied? The point is not merely that humans wouldn't be satisfied with fast satisfies as pig, but that somehow the quality of the higher pleasures is better. But what does it mean to speak a better pleasure? The formula he comes up with is happiness. Okay, not a life of rapture, but moments of such is an existence made up of few transitory pains, many and various pleasure, with a decided predominance of the active over the passive, and having as the foundation of the whole not to expect more than life, than it is capable of bestowing. Mill is clearly pushing the boundaries of the concept of pleasure by emphasizing higher qualities such as knowledge, intelligence, freedom, friendship, love, and health. In fact, one might even say that his litmus test for happiness really has little to do with actual pleasure and more to do with non-heroic cultivated state of mind. Okay, so that's the end of my report. Let us always remember that in this world there is only good and evil, and the last philosophers are non-religious philosophers. They are not asking help or guidance to our Almighty God. So let us always remember that whatever we do, regardless of situation we have, let us always choose to do good things for the pleasure of our Almighty Father. So I hope that we learned something from our report today, and this will be all, and thank you and God bless.